The voice on the phone didn't sound like grief. It sounded light, almost cheerful, like someone calling to say they'd found a bargain or won a small prize. "She died last night," my brother said, peacefully. "And before you ask, the lawyer confirmed it this morning. Everything's mine. You don't get a penny." The call ended before I could even reply. I sat there in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the faint buzz of a dead line while the clock on my nightstand blinked 4:12 a.m. If stories about family, money, and betrayal pull you in, if you want to understand how moments like this begin and where they really lead, then stay with me and make sure you're subscribed. What I discovered after this call changed everything, and walking away before the truth comes out would mean missing the most important part. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. What I felt instead was a slow, crawling cold that moved up my spine and settled behind my eyes. 12 hours earlier, I had been sitting at my mother's kitchen table, watching her stir honey into her tea with hands that shook just a little. She complained about the neighbor's dog and asked me if I thought the tomatoes would survive another cold snap. Dead people don't worry about tomatoes, and men who truly lose their mother don't sound like they just cleared a debt. I'm 64 years old enough to know when something doesn't add up. My brother David is 59, younger by 5 years and different by a lifetime. Growing up, he was the one teachers loved and neighbors praised. He smiled easily, talked fast, and always seemed to land on his feet, even when he'd clearly pushed someone else out of the way to do it. I was the quieter one, the one who stayed close to home, worked a job that didn't impress anyone at parties, and showed up when people needed help moving or fixing a leaky sink. When our father died, Mom leaned on me without ever asking. I moved closer, took over the grocery runs, the doctor visits, the long afternoons when she just wanted someone nearby so the house didn't feel so empty. Pensive face. David moved further away, chasing deals, schemes, and a lifestyle that never quite fit his paycheck. For years, his calls to Mom came in waves, always friendly at first, then urgent, then apologetic. She'd send money. He'd disappear again. About 2 years ago, Mom started acting different. She forgot names, repeated stories. Sometimes she'd stare at the wall like she was trying to remember how she got there. Doctors called it early dementia. David called it sad but expected. And then, slowly, he stopped calling at all. Sick parents are inconvenient when they can't sign checks. I stayed. I watched over her. I learned which days were good and which ones were foggy. And in between, there were moments when her eyes were sharp and clear, moments when she looked at me like she was measuring something. I thought it was fear. I didn't realize it was judgment. So when David claimed she was dead, and already talked about lawyers and inheritances before mentioning a service, my grief took a back seat to instinct. I didn't argue with him. I didn't accuse him. I just said I'd come by later. He told me not to bother. That was all I needed to hear. I dressed quietly, my movements stiff with a mix of age and dread, and drove the familiar 40 miles to the house I'd known my whole life. The sky was still black, the road empty, my headlights cutting through the dark like I was driving into something I didn't yet understand. When I pulled into her driveway, the porch light was on, bright and wrong at that hour. A black SUV sat near the garage, engine still warm. I tried my key. It didn't turn. The locks had been changed. My heart thudded once, hard, then settled into a heavy, steady beat. I walked around back, to the cellar door that never closed right, and slipped inside. The house smelled like lavender and dust, but underneath was something sharp and bitter. Medicine. I crept up the stairs, every step loud in my ears, and stopped when I heard voices. Not mourning, planning. A woman I didn't know said, "Calm and clinical." She stopped responding about 20 minutes ago. The dosage was more than enough. There was a pause. I held my breath. David answered, lower now, no smugness left in his voice. "So, she's gone." The woman hesitated. "Her pulse is weak, but that's fine," David cut in. "That's enough. She was old. People will understand." My stomach dropped. I pressed my hand against the wall to keep myself upright. He wasn't talking about moving her anymore. He was talking about ending her. "Once they take her," David continued, forcing calm into his voice, We stick to the story. Frank won't question it. He never does. In that moment, standing in my own mother's house, listening to my brother discuss her like a problem he'd finally solved, something inside me went cold and steady. This wasn't just theft. This wasn't just control. David believed he had killed her. And worse, he sounded relieved. I don't remember walking back to my truck. I only remember sitting there afterward, hands locked around the steering wheel, staring at the house where my mother had raised us, where she had laughed, cooked, worried, forgiven. Inside, my brother was already rehearsing his grief. I wanted to run back in and tear him away from her bedside, but fear stopped me. Fear and age and the awful understanding that if I acted without proof, he would bury her story along with her body. At dawn, a private medical transport arrived. No sirens, no urgency, just two men doing a job. They rolled a covered stretcher out the front door. I couldn't see her face, couldn't tell if she was breathing. David stood on the porch, arms folded, watching like a man overseeing a delivery. When the doors closed, he exhaled hard and rubbed his hands together. That sound still haunts me. Satisfaction. Finality. I didn't follow the van. I went straight to Sarah. When I told her what I'd heard, she didn't interrupt. She just listened, her face draining of color. When I finished, she opened a drawer and pulled out my mother's file. "Frank," she said quietly, "your brother never had power of attorney. Not medical, not financial. And your mother was very clear about one thing." She slid a small envelope across the desk. "If anything happens to me suddenly, she told me to give you this." Inside was a handwritten letter. The date was 3 weeks earlier. "If you're reading this," then David finally crossed the line I was afraid of. "I need you to know something before you blame yourself. I have been pretending. All of it. The confusion. The weakness. I needed to see who my sons were when they thought there was nothing left to take from me." My chest tightened. Sarah leaned back, eyes glossy. "She suspected he would try something irreversible," she said. "She prepared for it." That was when Sarah told me about the safeguards, the hidden camera, the second medical opinion she'd arranged quietly. The doctor who knew the pills David brought weren't vitamins. The dose that looked fatal but wasn't. My mother had planned for the worst. She just hadn't expected how close it would come. We found her that afternoon. She was alive. Barely conscious, yes. Weak, pale, but alive. The doctor confirmed it quietly while police stood nearby. "Another hour," he said, shaking his head. "Maybe less." I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, tears blurring my vision. She squeezed back. When she opened her eyes, she didn't ask where she was. She asked one thing. "Does David think I'm dead?" I nodded. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Good," she whispered. "Then he'll finally tell the truth." The funeral was set for 3 days later. David rushed it. Closed casket. Private cremation afterward. He wanted no delays, no questions, no chance for doubt. He called me voice heavy, measured. "I did everything I could," he said. "I was with her at the end." I let him lie. Every word tightened the noose he didn't see. The chapel was full the morning of the service. People cried. They hugged David. They told him what a good son he was. He accepted their sympathy like payment. I sat in the back, my heart pounding so loud I was sure others could hear it. The casket sat at the front, polished and sealed. Empty. David stepped up to speak. He talked about dignity, about how hard it was to make decisions when someone was no longer themselves. He talked about inheritance like it was responsibility, not greed. "My mother trusted me," he said, voice cracking on cue, "and I will honor her wishes." That's when the doors opened. The sound echoed through the chapel, slow and deliberate. No gasps at first, just confusion. Then my mother stepped inside, walking carefully but upright, wearing the blue dress she saved for special days. 2 police officers followed behind her. David turned. His face didn't show surprise. It showed terror. Not the fear of seeing someone alive. The fear of seeing someone he believed he had killed. His mouth opened. His knees buckled. He looked at the casket, then at her, then back at the casket like the world had split in half. No, he whispered. No, that's not possible. My mother stopped in front of him. You decided I was dead long before you ever tried to make it true, she said calmly. I just decided not to stay that way. The officers stepped forward. The words were clear. Elder abuse, attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. This time there was no arguing. David collapsed into a chair, sobbing, repeating that he hadn't meant it, that it just went too far. People stared at him like they were seeing him for the first time. He was led out in handcuffs. Afterward, when the chapel emptied and the shock settled into silence, my mother sat beside me, exhausted but steady. I needed to know, she said softly, which of my sons would stand by me when there was nothing to gain. I held her hand and understood something I'd never fully grasped before. Sweet revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It's letting the truth walk into the room on its own feet and watching lies collapse under their own weight. David wanted her dead so he could take everything. Instead, he lost everything, and she walked away with her life, her dignity, and the truth. If this story touched you, support the channel by liking this video, share it, and subscribe for more meaningful stories like this. See you in the next one.